There is inflation, but Italians are looking for every possible way not to burn their liquidity. And after 2 years of zero interest rates, we are finally talking again about deposit accounts, which, judging from some promotions I have seen around, seem almost convenient and therefore could represent a valid alternative for those looking for returns but don't want to take too much risk. Or maybe it's just a gimmick. In this video, I want to tell you about all the hidden costs of deposit accounts, explain how not to be fooled by easy promotions, but above all, I'll give you my opinion on deposit accounts. Are they a valid alternative or not? Hello everyone! Let's talk about deposit accounts again. First of all, for those who are not experts or may have only heard the term, what is a deposit account? The deposit account, I explain it like this. It's usually like a current account that you can't do anything with. You can't make transfers, there's no associated credit card, there's no operational function. You can only do one thing, deposit and withdraw money. That's it. For this reason, typically, the money found in deposit accounts doesn't move much. Yes, sometimes you deposit some sums, sometimes you withdraw them, but they tend to stay there. And this is a very positive point for banks that have these accounts. Let's remember, in fact, as a basic concept, that banks don't keep our money there waiting for us to need it, but actively use it to conduct their activities. So maybe they lend it, grant it in mortgages or other loans, make investments with it, and therefore for them, having an account where money doesn't move too much is very convenient. They will be able to use that money with much more ease and flexibility, which is why they are very happy to give us compensation, interest. And since interest rates are now rising in Europe, deposit account rates are also returning to rise, after 2 years when rates were practically zero. In addition, many of these banks had not promoted their deposit accounts at all in the last 2 years, while now they are magically returning to entice us with a whole series of apparently fantastic advertisements. So let's answer the question of questions. Is a deposit account a good investment? Before I tell you my opinion, which you may not like, in my opinion, let's assess the basic components of the investment, both risks and returns. Let's start with the risks in Italy. Just like current accounts, deposit accounts are also protected by the Deposit Guarantee Fund. This fund theoretically covers the account holder from the possibility that the financial institution may fail. Therefore, our capital is at risk. Thanks to this fund, however, the first 100,000 euros deposited in the account are covered. On paper, this means that if I deposit 50,000 euros in a deposit account and the financial institution goes bankrupt, then these 50,000 euros will be reimbursed to me by the Deposit Guarantee Fund. But what if I go to deposit 120,000? The situation changes. Only the first 100 will be reimbursed to me. I have lost the other 20. Now, why am I saying, in theory? Because this fund is very small. Only in 2019 it had a total size of 1.5 billion. Therefore, it may be sufficient to cover the failure of a small local bank. If larger institutions were to fail, such as Intesa and UniCredit, then this fund would be clearly undersized. At this point, if the fund were no longer sufficient, or if there were a generalized crisis in the entire banking sector, as there was in 2008, the state would have to intervene. Therefore, can we say that a deposit account has zero risks, considering that there would be state bailouts? Obviously not. However, the risks are very, very low. Let's talk now about yields. In fact, the deposit account attracts many investors. First of all, because of its very low risk. But every investor wants a yield. How can you understand the yield of a deposit account? You might say, what kind of question is that? I read it, it says something percent. No, it's not that simple. Unfortunately, banks often promote their deposit accounts by advertising what is called a promotional rate, which is an interest rate that the bank will actually give us. But maybe it will do so only for a limited period of time, precisely because it is a promotion. After that, it will return to the so-called standard rate, which will instead be maintained until the deposit account is closed. Sometimes, the difference between these two rates is huge. For example, the promotional rate for the first year might be 2% and the standard rate might then become 0.5%. But it doesn't end there. Because the rate you see is the gross rate, so a rate that still has to be reduced by all the capital gains taxes which, in the case of Italy, are 26% of the profits. So let's do a very simple simulation to understand how much we earn. Let's imagine that the offered interest rate is 2% gross. 2% gross minus capital gains taxes. We have arrived at 1.48%. At this point, we simply have to subtract 0.2%. So, Including the stamp duty, we are left with 1.28%. Let's round up to 1.3, almost half overall. So it shouldn't surprise us to know that deposit accounts allow us to risk very little, but also pay us very little. However, there is another very important thing to say about deposit accounts, namely the constraint. There are two types of deposit accounts, free or tied. Free or untied deposit accounts are exactly what we have talked about so far, namely a similar current account on which we can deposit and withdraw money but with interest. In this case, we can withdraw money tendentially when we want or perhaps with a very slight notice. However, banks also offer another type of account that pays much more interest, which is the tied account. In this case, the necessary condition for interest to be paid is that we keep the capital on this account for a predetermined period of time. The longer the constraint, the more the bank has the facility to use our capital and therefore the more it will reward us. In this case, there are also two sub-accounts. We have those tied but untied accounts, so we can withdraw the money actually losing the accumulated interest, and there are also tied non-withdrawable accounts, in which we make a contract with the bank and until the end of the term we cannot withdraw the money at all. Usually, the most common constraints are 1, 2, 3 years. And here we come to talk about what I think of deposit accounts. They are a sensible choice, in my opinion. Anyone with a bit of liquidity should open an unsecured deposit account. They pay very little, it's true, but still it's more than zero on our current account. So, if we have 20,000 euros and we want to keep them in immediate liquidity because we never know when we might need them, it's better to keep them in an unsecured deposit account. As for secured deposit accounts, my opinion is a little different. If I expect that I won't need a portion of the liquidity I have in the bank for the next 1 to 2 years, I don't think a deposit account is a great choice. A better option, in this case, could be government bonds, the so-called BTPs, Italian treasury bonds. This is because the risks are currently substantially similar, but with very different returns. Let's take an example. With a short search, I found a deposit account with a 1-year lock-in period that cannot be released. This means that, for no reason, we can't withdraw the money before the maturity date. With this deposit account, which doesn't pay me, it's just an example. It earns 2% gross, less taxes. We have 1.48% net. Let's take a look at a BTP instead. Doing the math, excluding commissions, a BTP with a 2-year maturity date earns 2.5% gross, less taxes which, in the case of a BTP, are lower. We arrive at a net annual return of 2.2%, which is 50% higher than a deposit account. Now, in my opinion, deposit accounts are fine as liquidity parking spaces, liquidity that you don't know if you will need or not, you don't know when, you don't know how much, and so, in doubt, it's better to keep them there that earn 0 point something, which is still better than zero. But if I already know that I won't need that money for 1, 2, even maybe 3 years, then I can do a little better planning and maybe consider instruments like these. I want to specify one thing. If I decide to follow the path of BTPs, I must be sure that I won't need that money in 1 or 2 years, because while on a withdrawable deposit account, if I withdraw the sum, at most I lose the interest. In this case, selling the BTP before maturity, there is a risk that the BTP may even be worth less. So I could lose money. However, if I decide to hold the bond until maturity, this problem doesn't arise. I didn't want to talk about the risks of BTPs in this case because, in my opinion, they are exactly the same as a deposit account. The concrete risk that a BTP blows up is that the Italian state defaults. And if this happens, there are problems even for deposit accounts. For this reason, I put them on the same level. Guys, let me know what you think about deposit accounts. Do you have one? Are you planning to get one since interest rates are rising? However, if you don't know what bonds such as BTPs are, you may want to learn more about them. Also, as usual, I ask you to subscribe, so that you don't miss all the videos that will be released. That's all for today, goodbye and see you next time.